They said it was just a portrait, but when he started painting her, the eyes on the canvas began to move. Every night, the painting changed, revealing things he never painted. Faces, shadows, secrets buried in the dark. And by the time he realized what it was showing him, the truth was already too late to erase. This is The Portrait of Fortune, a story where art remembers what the heart tries to forget. Ethan Cole sat in his tiny apartment, surrounded by unfinished canvases and bills he could no longer ignore. The once celebrated painter of Manhattan's art scene had become a forgotten name, a ghost drifting between galleries that no longer remembered his face. His fingers, once confident with a brush, trembled as he held a cheap cup of coffee, staring at the pile of rejection letters on his desk. Then came the knock. A sharp, deliberate sound that sliced through the silence like a promise. On the doorstep lay an envelope sealed with dark red wax, embossed with a golden crest, the Windsor Estate. Ethan turned it over, hesitating before breaking the seal. Inside, a letter written in elegant handwriting invited him to Napa Valley to paint a private portrait for Victoria Windsor, widow of the late real estate magnate Richard Windsor. It promised a sum large enough to erase his debts and maybe restore his name. He felt both suspicion and temptation stir in his chest. He searched the internet for information about her, but little was found. Victoria Windsor had withdrawn from public life after her husband's mysterious death 3 years ago. There were whispers of scandal, rumors of infidelity, but no proof, only silence and wealth. Ethan stared at the letter again, its perfume faintly floral, almost intoxicating. The opportunity felt like fate offering him one last hand before pushing him off the edge. He packed that night, his brushes and paints neatly arranged like weapons of redemption. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if preparing for a journey to a place where time didn't move the same way. The city outside pulsed with noise, but Ethan felt detached from it, a man already leaving one world for another. He barely noticed the rain tapping against his window like applause for a decision already made. As dawn broke, he boarded a small plane westward. Through the window, the rising sun glinted off his reflection, splitting his face in two, the man he was and the one he hoped to become. For a brief moment, he imagined success again, his name on gallery walls, critics praising his comeback. But beneath that fragile dream, a cold unease lingered. The invitation had felt too perfect, too precise, like someone had been waiting for him. When he landed, a black car awaited him at the small airport, driven by a quiet man in uniform who spoke only once. "Mrs. Windsor is expecting you." They drove for hours through winding roads and golden hills, where the vineyards stretched endlessly under the Californian sun. Ethan watched the landscape shift wild beauty, giving way to manicured perfection. The closer they got, the more he felt the air tighten. Finally, the car stopped before iron gates taller than any wall he'd ever seen. Beyond them stood the Windsor Estate, a mansion carved from stone and shadow, surrounded by gardens that bloomed too perfectly to be real. The air smelled of roses and secrets. Ethan stepped out, heart pounding, suitcase in hand. The gates creaked open without a sound, as if welcoming him into a place that already knew his name. The silence that followed was unsettling. No birds, no wind, just the faint hum of distant fountains and the echo of his footsteps. A woman in a dark uniform appeared on the steps, her eyes sharp and unreadable. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "Mrs. Windsor is delighted you accepted her invitation." Her tone suggested the opposite. Inside, the mansion felt both alive and dead, its beauty preserved like a painting frozen mid-brushstroke. Dustless chandeliers hung over marble floors. Portraits of solemn ancestors lined the walls, their gazes heavy with judgment. Ethan felt their eyes follow him as the housekeeper led him deeper inside. When he finally reached the end of a long corridor, the double doors opened soundlessly. A figure stood by the window, bathed in pale afternoon light. "Mr. Cole," said a voice that was both kind and commanding, "welcome to my home." It was Victoria Windsor, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the urge to paint again. That was just the beginning, and something tells me the mansion hasn't shown us its darkest secret yet. If you want to see what's waiting inside those walls, stay with us. subscribe, and join me as we turn the next page of The Portrait of Fortune. Victoria moved like a secret the world had forgotten. Her dress flowed around her like smoke, black silk that shimmered in the sunlight. "I've admired your work for years," she said, though her tone carried no warmth. Her eyes, grey, unreadable, measured him carefully, as if deciding whether he would be worthy of whatever truth she wanted immortalized. Ethan bowed slightly, unsure whether to thank her or apologize for his fall from grace. She gestured toward a large sitting room, its walls filled with art, none of it hers. "I want a portrait," she said, "but not of who the world thinks I am. I want you to paint me as I truly am." Her words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Ethan nodded, unsure what she meant. Truth in art was always dangerous. Grace Miller, the housekeeper, entered quietly with tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured, and her eyes darted to Victoria with something close to fear. When Victoria left the room momentarily, Grace leaned closer and whispered, "Be careful what you see in this house, Mr. Cole. Not all beauty should be painted." Then she straightened, her expression cold again, as if the words had never left her lips. Ethan explored the mansion later that day. Every room was curated to perfection. Rich mahogany furniture, crystal decanters untouched by dust, books with gilded spines that no one had opened in years. Yet something beneath the order felt off, like a painting where the perspective was wrong, but you couldn't quite tell why. In the West Wing, he found the art studio prepared for him. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, landing on an empty easel and a brand new set of paints. The brushes were arranged exactly how he used to organize them, even the same brand of linseed oil he preferred. He froze. How could she have known? That night, unable to sleep, Ethan wandered the halls. The house was silent, except for the distant ticking of a clock that never seemed to strike the hour. He passed a locked door near the end of the corridor, ornate, with an iron handle worn by touch. He reached for it instinctively but stopped when he heard faint music, like a lullaby coming from within. He backed away, unsettled. The air felt colder there, heavier. When he returned to his room, he found something strange. A fresh rose on his nightstand, laid on top of his letter from Victoria. No note, no explanation, just the flower and the faint smell of perfume identical to the one that had scented the invitation. As he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Ethan realized something terrifyingly simple. The painting hadn't even begun, and yet he already felt like part of it. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the high studio windows, painting golden lines across the wooden floor. Victoria appeared precisely at 9, wearing a deep emerald dress that shimmered like glass when she moved. Ethan stood ready, his brushes lined up with military precision, his heart beating faster than he wished to admit. When she sat before the blank canvas, the air shifted as if the house itself had paused to listen. He picked up his brush and met her gaze for the first time. Her eyes were grey but not cold. They were endless, reflecting light, like a storm brewing beneath calm waters. As he began sketching, she watched him with quiet intensity, the faintest smile curving her lips. "You look nervous," she said softly. Most men do when they realize how much a portrait can reveal. Her tone was playful, but her words felt like a warning. Ethan forced a polite laugh, hiding the chill that ran through his spine. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the faint scratch of bristles against canvas. Ethan lost himself in her features, the arch of her brow, the subtle tension in her jaw, the sadness in her eyes that seemed almost rehearsed. When he stepped back to study his progress, the outline looked alive, too alive. He blinked, sure he saw the faint impression of another face in the shadows behind her. But when he looked again, it was gone. Victoria rose from her chair gracefully, inspecting the canvas. "You have talent, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "But talent alone is never enough. You must see the truth, even when it frightens you." Then she left, leaving the scent of perfume and unease behind. Ethan stared at the portrait long after she was gone, a strange whisper echoing in his mind. "Even when it frightens you." That night he dreamed of the same eyes, Victoria's eyes, staring through darkness, unblinking. In the dream, her lips moved soundlessly, as if trying to tell him something. He woke with his heart pounding, sweat soaking his sheets. The first light of dawn touched the edge of his canvas. For a second, he thought he saw a shadow behind her painted figure, the faint shape of a man's hand resting on her shoulder. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of work and uneasy quiet. Ethan spent hours in the studio, painting with precision and restraint, yet every stroke felt guided by something unseen. Victoria sat with stillness that bordered on unnatural, her gaze locked on him the entire time. When she smiled, it never reached her eyes. The silence between them became heavier, like a dialogue neither dared to speak aloud. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the valley. The studio darkened, and thunder rumbled like footsteps above the ceiling. Ethan continued painting despite the flickering lights, compelled by an urgency he couldn't explain. As lightning flashed, the canvas seemed to shimmer, revealing something he hadn't painted. A faint outline of a man standing just behind her chair. He stumbled back, brush slipping from his hand. When the light returned, the figure was gone. Victoria noticed his pale face and tilted her head. "You see him too, don't you?" she asked quietly. The question froze him. "Who?" he managed to whisper. She smiled, slow and knowing. "No one ever believes what they paint," she murmured. Then she rose and walked to the window, her reflection merging with the storm outside. For a moment, he thought he saw her reflection whisper to itself, moving even when she stood still. After she left, Ethan locked the studio door and stared at the portrait. He traced the faint shape with trembling fingers, feeling the texture of paint that shouldn't be there. His rational mind screamed for logic, a trick of light, exhaustion, anything. But deep inside, he knew something was wrong. The painting had begun to create itself, as though the truth beneath its layers demanded to be seen. That night, when he tried to rest, the wind outside howled through the hallways like a voice calling his name. He pressed his pillow over his ears, but the sound seemed to come from within the walls, from within the house itself. And beneath it all, faint but certain, he could hear the rhythm of soft footsteps pacing outside his door, stopping only when he whispered, "Who's there?" The storm passed, but its echo lingered through the halls of the Windsor Estate. Ethan found himself waking before dawn, drawn to the studio as if the painting whispered for him to return. Every time his brush touched the canvas, he felt resistance, like the paint itself refused to obey. The portrait now seemed darker, heavier. Victoria's face appeared almost mournful, her painted eyes following him no matter where he stood. Grace noticed the change too. "You're not sleeping," she said one morning, her voice low. Ethan ignored her concern, but she continued, "Sometimes the house takes from those who stay too long." Her gaze flickered toward the locked door down the corridor, the one that hummed faintly at night. "Whatever you do, don't open that room," she whispered, then walked away. Ethan wanted to ask what she meant, but fear sealed his throat. That night he examined the portrait under candlelight, desperate to prove his sanity. As the flame flickered, shadows danced across Victoria's painted face, yet one of them didn't move with the light. It lingered behind her shoulder, shaped like a man leaning close to whisper. Ethan's hand trembled. He blinked rapidly, but the shadow remained, watching him. A gust of wind blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness. He relit it with shaking hands, and the shadow was gone. But something had changed. The color of Victoria's painted lips had deepened, and a streak of crimson now marred her collarbone. Ethan stumbled back, his heart hammering. He hadn't painted that. He couldn't have. It was as if the portrait was remembering something he didn't know. Sleep became impossible. He began hearing faint music drifting through the vents, a slow piano melody that stopped the moment he tried to find its source. One night, as he walked the halls, he saw a reflection in a nearby mirror. Not his own, but a man standing behind him, smiling faintly before fading away. The same man from the portrait, the same man Victoria swore did not exist. Ethan avoided Victoria for 2 days, claiming he was adjusting the tones on the portrait. In truth, he spent hours studying the reflection of the man's face. He found himself sketching it over and over, each drawing clearer than the last, strong jaw, piercing eyes and a cruel smile he recognized but couldn't place. When he finally confronted Victoria, she laughed softly. "You're imagining ghosts," she said. "This house can play tricks on lonely minds." But Ethan wasn't convinced. That night, he searched the library for anything about Richard Windsor, Victoria's late husband. In an old business magazine, he found a photo and froze. The man smiling beside Victoria was the same face haunting his painting. His hands shook as he compared the images. It was identical, even down to the shadowed dimple in his left cheek. His blood ran cold. The next day, Victoria visited the studio, wearing pearls that gleamed like ice. "You've gone pale," she remarked. "Are you unwell?" Ethan hesitated, then asked about her husband. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes darkened. "Richard was complicated," she said. "He loved this house more than me, and perhaps that's why it took him first." The way she said it made his skin crawl. Later that night, Ethan caught sight of movement in the reflection of the studio window, a faint image of a man standing behind him, his features half hidden in the glass. When he turned, there was nothing. But in the painting, something new had appeared. A faint blood-red fingerprint smeared across the corner of the canvas. He hadn't touched that side in days. Unable to bear it, he draped the portrait with a white cloth and locked the studio. Yet when he returned in the morning, the cover had been removed, folded neatly beside the easel. The painting looked slightly different again, Victoria's painted expression now calm, almost pleased, as if she knew something he didn't. And when Ethan glanced at his reflection in the glass, for the briefest second, he swore he saw Richard Windsor smiling back. Ethan stopped keeping track of time. Days blended into nights, and his reflection in the mirror became a stranger's. The portrait had grown beyond him. Every brushstroke seemed guided by a force neither human nor sane. Victoria's visits became more frequent, her voice a melody that wrapped around his will like silk. "You see me more clearly than anyone ever has," she whispered once, her hand grazing his. The contact sent a shiver through him, not of warmth, but of warning. He tried to resist, to step away, but she knew exactly how to pull him back. She fed his pride, reminding him of his lost fame, his wasted talent. "This painting will make the world remember your name," she said, and for a moment, he believed her. Each word was poison wrapped in charm. Each glance made him forget why he'd come. The more he painted, the more her presence filled his thoughts, until the portrait was all that existed. Grace watched him quietly, her concern deepening. One evening she approached him with trembling hands. "Mr. Cole," she whispered, "when the last painter came here, he said the same thing that the portrait painted itself. He vanished before finishing it." Ethan froze. "What happened to him?" he asked. But Grace only looked toward the locked door and whispered, "Some truths live behind that door. Leave before they find you." Then she disappeared down the hallway. That night, Ethan stood before the covered painting, torn between fear and fascination. He lifted the cloth slowly, revealing Victoria's painted figure bathed in eerie light. Her eyes seemed alive, lips curved in a half-smile that hadn't been there before. He took a step closer and realized she was holding something new in her painted hand, a small silver key glinting faintly. Ethan's heart pounded as his gaze drifted toward the real locked door outside the studio. He turned away, shaking. Logic told him it was coincidence, imagination twisted by exhaustion, but the key haunted him. It appeared again the next morning, clearer than before, catching the light like a signal. It was as if the portrait wanted him to open that door. He told himself he wouldn't. He promised himself. But as the night fell and the whispers began again, he found the studio door open and a small silver key resting on his easel. Ethan didn't remember walking to the hallway, only the cold metal of the key in his palm and the rhythmic echo of his footsteps. The locked door loomed before him, ancient and waiting. He hesitated, breath shallow, heart thundering in his ears. Behind it, faintly, came the sound of a piano, the same melody he'd heard through the vents. His hand trembled as he slid the key into the lock. It turned easily, as though the door had been waiting all along. The room beyond was small and dark, illuminated only by the moonlight spilling through the window. Dust floated in the air like ghosts. In the center stood another easel, older, covered in a sheet yellowed by time. Ethan stepped closer, the boards creaking underfoot. When he pulled away the cloth, his breath caught. It was another portrait of Victoria, younger, radiant, yet with the same haunted eyes. But beside her, half finished, was the face of a man he recognized instantly. Richard Windsor. A shiver ran through him. The painting was nearly identical to his own, same composition, same eerie realism. Yet in this one, Richard's expression was peaceful, unaware of the shadow growing behind him. Ethan stumbled back as realization struck. He wasn't the first to paint this scene. Someone before him had begun to uncover the same secret, and if Grace had told the truth, that artist never left the mansion alive. He spun around and found Victoria standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the pale glow of moonlight. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, almost mournful. Her eyes glistened, but her voice carried steel. "Some doors are better left closed, Mr. Cole. Curiosity can turn art into confession." Her gaze flickered toward the old painting, then to him. "Do you understand now why I chose you?" Ethan's voice failed him. His mind screamed yes. She stepped closer, the scent of roses and decay surrounding her. "Finish the portrait," she whispered. "Only then will you see the truth." And with that, she turned and left, the door closing behind her with a gentle click. Ethan remained frozen, the two paintings staring at him like mirrors of fate, one from the past, one from the present, both leading to the same terrible revelation waiting beneath the final layer of paint. Ethan didn't paint the next morning. He couldn't. Every glance toward the canvas filled him with dread. The face of Victoria seemed to shift slightly. Each time he looked, her expression alive, her eyes darker, her lips curved in what felt like cruel amusement. He barely noticed Grace enter the studio until she touched his arm. "You've seen too much," she whispered. Her hand trembled as she slipped something small into his palm, a silver flash drive. "It's her confession." She looked toward the door before continuing. "Hide it. Don't listen to it here." Her voice cracked, fear bleeding through her composure. "If she knows, she'll—" Grace stopped suddenly, her eyes darting past him. Ethan turned, but no one was there. When he looked back, Grace was gone, her footsteps fading into the hall. The studio door stood half open, swaying softly. He felt his stomach drop. Something in the house had shifted, watching, listening. That night, in his locked room, Ethan plugged the flash drive into his laptop. Static filled the speakers before a voice emerged, smooth, composed, and unmistakably Victoria's. "I told him to stop," she said, her tone calm. "But he wouldn't. He wanted the truth, so I gave it to him, brushstroke by brushstroke, until the color ran red." Ethan froze. Then came a sound, the crack of glass, a man's choked cry, and silence. His heart hammered in his chest as realization clawed at his mind. He removed the flash drive and hid it inside his coat, terrified that the walls themselves might whisper what he'd heard. Every sound in the house now felt deliberate. The creak of floorboards, the sigh of wind through the windows, the faint melody of a piano playing somewhere deep below. He remembered the locked room and the unfinished portrait. It wasn't just a painting, it was a crime scene sealed in canvas. When he left his room the next morning, Grace's absence was immediate. Her duties undone, her teacart overturned, Ethan found a smear of blood near the base of the staircase, faint but fresh. Panic set in. He ran to the studio, heart racing, but stopped cold at the door. The painting had changed again. Victoria's hand, once holding the key, was now empty. Her painted eyes seemed to look directly at him, whispering through silence, "Now you know." Ethan locked himself in the studio, the scent of oil paint thick in the air. He couldn't stop now. He had to finish the portrait, had to understand what it was revealing. His hands moved furiously, driven by fear and obsession. Layer after layer, he added new strokes, each revealing details he didn't intend. The shadows deepened, colors darkened, and slowly, unmistakably, another figure began to emerge behind Victoria. It was Richard Windsor, and his eyes were open. The realization hit like a blow. The portrait wasn't showing imagination. It was memory. Someone's memory. Her memory. His pulse thundered in his ears as he painted faster. guided by something beyond control. He remembered Victoria's words, "Finish it, and you'll see the truth." And now, with every stroke, the truth bled through. In the painted reflection, Richard's face twisted into agony, his throat marked by the faintest streak of crimson. Victoria entered silently, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. "You've done it," she said, her voice trembling with awe and something darker. Ethan turned, sweat dripping down his temples. "You killed him," he said, the words a whisper of disbelief. Victoria's lips curved into a sad, almost gentle smile. "He was cruel. He wanted to destroy me, to take everything. I only gave him what he deserved." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, or maybe it was madness. Ethan stepped back, but she advanced slowly, her fingers grazing the edge of the painting. "This is my truth," she murmured. "Now it's yours too." He stared at her, horror and pity warring within him. "You used me," he said. "You made me paint your confession." Her laughter was soft, echoing through the room like a lullaby. "No, Ethan, I didn't make you. You wanted to see. You always did." He turned toward the canvas, unable to look away. Victoria's painted figure now stood over her husband's body, blood dripping from her hands, her face both terrified and serene. The final brushstroke glimmered under the light, a streak of red that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The painting was finished, and with that realization came the faint sound of footsteps in the hall, not Victoria's this time, but heavier, deliberate, approaching the studio door. Ethan didn't remember leaving the mansion, only the weight of the finished painting burning in his chest. He drove through the night to San Francisco, the portrait carefully wrapped in linen beside him, whispering through the fabric like a living thing. He had called a curator friend who still owed him a favor, a small private gallery, discreet, where he could unveil the truth. "It's not art," Ethan had said. "It's evidence." But even as he said it, part of him still wanted admiration, recognition, redemption. Inside the gallery, the lights hummed softly. The portrait stood at the center of the room, draped in black cloth like a funeral shroud. Ethan circled it slowly, unable to shake the feeling that it was watching him. He thought of Grace, of her warning, and of Victoria's voice saying, "Now, it's yours too." Guilt coiled inside him like smoke. He wondered if exposing her would set him free or damn him alongside her. The first guests arrived, critics, collectors, journalists who still remembered his name. "A private showing," he told them, "of a portrait unlike any other." His voice shook, but his smile didn't. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked. He could feel the tension rise as the moment approached. He stepped forward, hands trembling, and took hold of the black cloth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "truth is not painted, it bleeds." And with one pull, he revealed it. Gasps filled the air. The portrait seemed to glow under the lights. Victoria, regal and beautiful, standing over her husband's lifeless body. The colors moved as if alive, shadows whispering between the layers of paint. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some saw horror, others genius. And then the lights flickered. For a split second, Victoria's painted eyes looked straight at him, alive, furious, unbound. Before he could move, the doors burst open. Victoria stood there, draped in black, her face pale and calm as death. "You shouldn't have brought it here," she said. Her voice carried through the gallery like a curse. The crowd fell silent. "This isn't your truth, Ethan. It's mine." She stepped closer, reaching into her coat. Ethan's heart froze as he saw the gun glint beneath the lights. "And it dies with me." The first shot shattered the silence. The bullet missed him by inches, splintering the wooden frame behind the portrait. Guests screamed, scattering for the exits. Ethan ducked behind a pedestal, the world spinning in chaos. "Victoria, stop!" he shouted. But her expression was cold, almost serene. "I warned you," she said. "You've chained us both to this curse." Another shot rang out, grazing his arm. Pain flared hot, blinding. He stumbled toward the painting. Smoke began to fill the room as candles toppled in the chaos. Flames licked the walls, devouring velvet curtains. Victoria approached slowly, her gun shaking. "You wanted the truth so badly," she whispered. "Now live with it." Ethan's blood mixed with paint as he reached for the canvas, fingers slick and trembling. He seized a bucket of red paint beside him, his last act of defiance, and hurled it across the portrait. The color splashed like blood, merging with the painted red already there. The firelight caught it, and for a moment the image seemed to come alive, Victoria screaming soundlessly as the figure of Richard Windsor opened his painted eyes. She froze, gun lowering, her face pale with horror. "What have you done?" she gasped. Ethan looked up through the smoke and whispered, "Set you free." The ceiling cracked above them, raining embers. Victoria dropped the gun and stumbled back, staring at the portrait as it burned yet refused to vanish. Flames climbed its edges, but the image remained clear, her own reflection staring back, weeping. She let out a strangled sob, her knees buckling as the room erupted in fire. Ethan crawled toward the door, coughing, but stopped when he saw her silhouette kneeling before the flames. The last thing he heard was her whisper, "It's beautiful." When firefighters arrived hours later, the gallery was a skeleton of ash and smoke. Amid the ruins, they found two bodies, one male, one female, lying close but untouched by the worst of the fire. Between them, miraculously preserved, was the painting. The colors were brighter than before, the blood deeper, the faces hauntingly alive. And though the flames had burned everything else, the title plate remained untouched, the Portrait of Fortune. The morning after the fire, the gallery stood in eerie silence, a graveyard of melted frames and blackened marble. Investigators moved cautiously through the ruins, their flashlights cutting through ash and smoke. Near the center, untouched by the destruction, stood the Portrait of Fortune. Its surface gleamed faintly beneath the soot, colors vibrant and impossibly intact. "How did this survive?" one officer whispered. The curator crossed himself and murmured, "Maybe it wasn't meant to burn." News of the tragedy spread quickly. Articles called it the Fire of Truth, speculating on the mystery behind the painting that refused to die. Some said it was a miracle, others a curse. Ethan Cole was presumed dead, his body found near the remains of Victoria Windsor. But rumors swirled that he'd fled, that the painting had driven him mad, that he was still watching from the shadows, protecting the secret his masterpiece held. When the museum acquired the painting months later, strange events began. Lights flickered near it. Visitors claimed to hear whispers, soft and indistinct, when standing too close. A janitor quit after swearing he saw a shadow move behind the painted glass. Yet, despite the rumors, crowds gathered daily to see it. Critics hailed it as a timeless expression of guilt and obsession. But the more people stared, the more uneasy they became, as if the painting stared back. The museum director ordered extra security after a guard collapsed one night. He'd been found staring at the portrait, muttering Ethan's last words, "Set you free." Doctors said it was exhaustion, but those who saw his eyes disagreed. They were wide, terrified, reflecting something unseen. Over time, the painting became a legend, earning a reputation as cursed. Yet still it drew crowds. Beauty, it seemed, could make even horror irresistible. One evening, long after closing, a janitor swore he saw movement within the portrait, a flicker of red, the shimmer of eyes opening. He ran, trembling, and the next morning refused to return. When the curators examined the painting, they found something new. The brush strokes near the background had changed, faint but clear. A man's silhouette, standing behind Victoria, head bowed in sorrow. Ethan Cole had returned to his masterpiece at last. Years passed, and the Portrait of Fortune became one of the most discussed artworks in America. Scholars argued over its origins, historians debated its meaning, and collectors offered fortunes to own it all refused. It was considered untouchable, a relic of death and genius. Yet those who studied it closely noticed something unsettling. The colors continued to shift, as though the painting was still alive, still breathing. The reds deepened, the shadows thickened, the eyes of Victoria changed subtly each year. An art historian named Dr. Helena Price dedicated her career to unraveling its mystery. She wrote that the painting captures not a moment, but a confession suspended in eternity. Yet as her fascination grew, her health declined. Colleagues said she spent too many nights alone with it, whispering to the portrait as though expecting it to answer. In her final notes, she claimed she saw two figures reflected in the glass, Victoria and Ethan, standing side by side. The museum displayed the painting under glass, but nothing could contain its presence. Visitors reported cold air around it, even in summer. Some said the smell of roses filled the room briefly before fading into smoke. Others claimed that when the lights dimmed, Victoria's lips parted slightly, her painted eyes wet with tears. The staff dismissed it as imagination, but the security footage told another story. Frames glitched whenever someone mentioned her name. At night, the guards took turns avoiding the east wing. One reported hearing a man's voice near the painting, soft and regretful. It was never supposed to end like this. When he turned on the light, the sound vanished, replaced by the faint drip of red paint sliding down the frame. Yet the next morning, no mark remained. Experts later confirmed impossibly that the pigments used in the portrait were unlike any known to modern chemistry. Still, the museum refused to remove it. "It's art," the director said. "It doesn't harm anyone." But one evening, a visitor collapsed after staring into Victoria's painted eyes for too long. Before fainting, she whispered. She blinked. Cameras showed nothing. Yet that night, janitors swore they heard quiet laughter echoing through the halls. Not cruel, but tired, like that of someone who had finally accepted the price of her fortune. When the museum finally closed for restoration, the painting was quietly removed under the cover of night. No public announcement, no ceremony. Only a single truck left the loading dock, bound for a private estate in the hills of Oregon. The buyer's name was withheld, but rumors whispered of a billionaire collector obsessed with haunted art. Inside the truck, the portrait of Fortune was wrapped in silk and chained to the floor, as though it could escape if given the chance. The new owner, Michael Graves, admired beauty in all its forms, especially the kind that frightened him. He placed the painting in his private gallery, surrounded by marble statues and dim golden light. For hours, he stood before it, mesmerized. "Magnificent," he murmured. Victoria's painted eyes seemed softer now, her expression mournful rather than cruel. He felt a strange connection to her, as though she recognized him. Perhaps she did. That night, the house grew restless. The lights flickered, and the scent of roses filled the air. Michael dismissed it as nerves until he noticed condensation forming on the inside of the glass frame. He leaned closer, breath fogging the surface, and froze. Behind Victoria's figure, faint but unmistakable, was the silhouette of a man not the same as before. Taller, broader. The man's face was blurred, but as lightning flashed outside, it came into focus. Ethan Cole was smiling. Michael stumbled back, heart pounding, but his fascination only deepened. He poured a drink, returned to his chair, and whispered, "What do you want?" The room answered with silence. Then, faintly, the speakers of his security system crackled to life. A voice, low, strained, familiar, filled the air. "Truth doesn't burn." The glass over the painting splintered, a single crack running across Victoria's throat, and then the power went out. When his staff entered the gallery the next morning, the painting hung undamaged, but something was different. Victoria's painted expression had changed again. She no longer looked sorrowful. She was smiling faintly, her hand resting over her heart, and beside her in the background stood the fully formed figure of Ethan Colebrush in hand, eyes glimmering with peace. The plaque beneath the frame now bore a new inscription, carved overnight into the wood. "Some truths live forever." In the end, the painting survived, and so did the secret. Some say you can still see their faces move when the lights go out, others say it's just imagination. What do you think? Was it art or something darker? Tell me your theory in the comments. If this story gave you chills, leave a like and subscribe for more haunting tales that stay with you long after the screen fades to black.